Aloha, this is your astrologer Tom, and in this video I want to talk about why I don't play the game Guess the Sign and what I do instead to be able to navigate the situation at hand. It's actually very, very powerful stuff. So you may see that on social media there's a lot of these, hey, my so-and-so is this way or that way, what's their sign, or guess the sign, or my partner is like this and I'm like this, guess the sign. And it's like I don't play that game because there's so much more to the chart than just the sun sign, right? And so there's a lot of this misconception around the person being their sun sign, when in reality the person is learning what the sun sign, their own sun sign. They're learning how to be that sign, right? It's potential. It's who you're becoming, less of who you are. There's so much in the chart. Whether it's other planets, whether it's other signs, whether it's the houses, the house cusps, the aspects. I spent a lot of time on Soul Journey and aspects. So moon to sun, south node, north node, south node, Chiron, and the ascendant, and then the actual the house cusp and the aspects. Spent a lot of time on aspects. Now, here's what I will tell you: you can actually, instead of guessing the sign, you can actually listen for how the person is communicating and calibrate on their behavior. And you can actually figure out which energy is active in that moment, right? Which energy in their chart is what's active, and then leverage what you know about that particular type of placement to navigate the situation. This is a pretty advanced topic and pretty powerful stuff, because what you can do is, regardless of whether you're right or not, right? The interesting part here is we all have the 12 signs, the 10 planets, right? And so regardless of whether you're right or not about what you think is in their chart, it's actually the way that you're perceiving the way that the energy is coming off for them. And so it's a combination of your reality in your chart and their reality in their chart that you then get to navigate. And so you can actually pick up on these things. Now, I've done things where I've been spot on accurate with their chart, where I'm like, okay, what's active right now is probably this type of placement. And then they eventually, they give me their information, and I look up the chart. I'm like, oh, that was spot on. Because I've done this a lot, right? I've actually done this a lot. Now, the key is, though, it doesn't necessarily have to be an exact placement. It's what's energy is active. This comes up in relationships, for example, when somebody is, let's say they are early on in dating, and they're just enjoying really good conversation, and you're going on multiple dates, and it's really just all conversation. Well, maybe they have a Venus in Gemini. Maybe their fifth house is in Gemini. I mean, who knows? But if it's more of a Gemini-like conversation, then it's like, okay, entertain the conversation and recognize the next level of it, right? So recognize, okay, well, what's going to do? A common one like this is Scorpio in a chart, strong scorpionic presence during a relationship. They may start off very reserved, and one of the things you got to do with if that's what's happening, is you kind of got to just build comfort and let that person then move it forward on their own. And it's a very interesting dynamic, because if you take something like a scorpionic presence of active energy, and somebody who might have a little bit more Sagittarian energy, well, if the Scorpio needs the comfort, and I'm not talking Sun in Scorpio, I'm just talking, could be a Venus in Scorpio, could be a rising Scorpio, could be a fifth house Scorpio, could be a Mars in Scorpio, right? And then the other person, there's a strong Sag presence going on in that moment. Well, that might clash. It might clash because the Sag person might want things to go faster than the Scorpionic person is ready to receive them. And so if you pay attention to what's present, and it's just, how do you navigate that? One of the other things you don't want to do if there's Scorpionic tendencies active is kind of push back on them. You kind of just got to let them not have anything to push on, because the tail can come out. They can do some stinging. So if you sense that that's what's active, yeah, you kind of just gotta, not be confrontational. With a, and you can do this with anything. So if you're talking to somebody and you're like, hey, there's a strong Cancerian presence, so there's nurturing and caring and discussions of family and stuff like that, then you entertain those conversations and you provide other Cancerian related things, comfort, nurturing related things, cozy moments, maybe massage, maybe, just, nights in or whatever the case may be, right? If it's a strong Sagittarian presence, then maybe you're out doing adventure, or maybe you're talking about purpose and just what drives you and what's true for each person and that type of thing. And, so in conversation, it's what's active in that moment. And then how do you, and then knowing your intention for the conversation, how do you navigate what's active in the moment to guide the conversation? So I don't play the guess the sign games, because there's so much that can be, like, if you describe something to me and then I look at the person's chart, I'm like, okay, so if you describe something to me about you and I look at your chart, I can explain what energy is active from your description to the chart, and then use that to help navigate whatever's going on in your life. If you're actually describing somebody else, this is the interesting part. If you're like, well, I'm this way and my partner's that way, this other way, I actually got to look at your chart still, right? Because it's how you're perceiving your partner is actually in your chart. And then if both of you come to me and you both describe yourself and the other person, right, it can help you then relate it together. Because it's each way that you're perceiving one another. So the idea here is not to pay attention to the sun sign as much, but rather to look at what energy is active for the situation at hand. This energy is such and such. I had a situation where I was, before I found my girlfriend, while I was dating, I went on a date and this woman was explaining things, and I'm like, this sounds like a moon in Scorpio. So I just said, okay, I don't know her chart. Let me just test. And I said, and I described her problem in a little bit more detail. And she's like, yeah, that's it. I'm like, well, here's what you're feeling. Here's what you're experiencing. And she's like, yep, that's it. And I'm like, this is actually what you want, this other thing. And she's like, yep. And I'm like, so really the way to do that is this other thing, but you're not as comfortable in doing that because of this other thing. And she's like, that's exactly it. And I'm like, okay, so that is like moon in Scorpio, whether or not she had a moon in Scorpio. Turns out, I mean, she gave me her birthday and whatnot. And I looked up and it was a moon in Scorpio. And so it made, perfect sense. But regardless of whether it was a moon in Scorpio or not, the lower expression of Scorpio that she was describing, right? It could have been a house cusp. It could have been Venus if it was around relationships. It could have been Saturn, if it was around maybe father, right? So it's just what's active. So you got to kind of listen to the context, the way that it's being described, calibrate on the person's behavior. And then knowing what energy is active for them, what is it that you need to do, or who do you need to be to guide that interaction? The more that I understand what energy is active for the other person, the easier it is for me to help them navigate the situations in their life if they're a client, or even if they're just talking to me. Some people will take their own stuff and filter me through it. And it's helpful to know how they're perceiving me, what energy is active, so that I can help them navigate that. Right? So, there's always a way to explain what energy is active. So if somebody says, hey, I'm like this, and they give you just 6 words like, oh, I like to stay home all the time. What sign am I? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. But if I look at your chart, I could probably tell you what energy, actually, I could tell you what energy is prominent that indicates why you like to stay at home versus, oh, I like to travel all the time. What sign am I? People will generally say Sag, and they're like, wrong. And it's like, well, wrong. But if you're a Sag rising, or so if you're a Sag rising, you might express a lot of long distance travel. If you have Sag, what depends? Travel a lot for what? Travel a lot for work? Maybe there's Sag on the 10th. Who knows? A Sag moon, though. If somebody has a Sag moon, right? Let's think this one through. And Cancer sun. And they're like, I like to travel a lot. What sign am I? And you're like, Sag. You're like, wrong. And he's like, well, but you're actually learning a little bit more about nurturing and caring and family and creativity. And the moon expression's still active, right? So some people are proud of the guess being wrong, but they don't realize that it's actually because of the other placements in their chart. They aren't as refined yet. And I'm like, so I want the person to tap into the power of it and be like, okay, right now, you like to travel a lot because you feel this. If it's moon and Sag, you feel this thrill. If it's Sag rising, you have this identity around this travel and you don't like to be in one place necessarily. So, but you're learning, Sun in Cancer, for example, you're learning that nurturing, caring. And if the Sun in Cancer is, let's say, in the 4th, it could even be at home. If the Sun in Cancer is in the 10th, it could be in the career, in bringing that in. If the Sun in Cancer is in the 5th, it could be with kids, with your own kids. So somebody who might have a moon in Sag, and then a Sun in Cancer placement in one of those other areas, they might be like, wow, I'm not going to have a family. I'm not going to settle down like this. I'm this free spirit. And it's like, well, your chart's kind of saying that you're going, you're going to go in this other direction, right? So I don't play the guess the sign game, right? I just listen to what's active in the discussion. So if somebody's describing a problem, I can listen for what energies are active. Because some people generally, so if somebody says, hey, I'm having a problem in my job or my career, they go to the 10th house. Maybe they look at the 6th. Maybe they look at the 2nd because of money. But really, even though I'm looking at those things, I'm listening for how they're perceiving what's actually going on. And then I'm finding that energy. Because let's say there's a planet in the 10th house. Okay. And even if there isn't, there's the cusp, right? So is there a planet in the 10th that is aspected to something else? So maybe they're like, my job this, my boss never values me, da-da-da. Boss is also 10th house, right? So boss is also 10th, not just career. So, okay. And then they're like, but my boss this, my boss that, they never value me, yada, yada. And I'm like, okay, that almost sounds Saturnian, right? It almost sounds like, it almost sounds like Saturn. So does Capricorn rule their 10th? In which case, right, Saturn rules Capricorn, in which case there's a Saturn play that way. Or is there a planet in their 10th that's activated by aspect Saturn somewhere else in their chart, right? Or is Saturn coming up from another area? So I'll look at, generally there's some sort of way to connect the dots. There's some sort of way, and this is what I love doing by looking at the aspects. So, for example, if somebody has Saturn in the 7th, okay, let's say they have, I don't know, just make up another, Mars in the 10th, for example. Okay, cool. And the Mars and Saturn square, okay, then Saturn in the 7th, I might actually say, okay, so I'm like, in my mind, I'm thinking they're feeling restricted by, maybe it's Saturn, maybe it's the sign on the 10th as well, maybe. And I'll test the sign on I test a little bit more of the closest. So I look at what's the sign on the 10th, how would that be in a lower expression? And then I also look at, okay, well, what aspects are there to planets in the 10th? And even to what aspects are there to the house cusps? And so if I see Saturn in the seventh, for example, I may be like, well, I think, I said, well, what about, tell me about your relationship. Oh, well, my relationship's good. I feel, valued there. No, 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 no. Tell me about how you perceive your partner in the relationship. Oh, my partner, huh? Yeah, I'm not really sure it's the right partner. He or she treats me well, but I'm not, I don't know. And it's like, eventually I get the person to go, eventually the person realizes, oh, so they're not actually feeling valued. Their partner's not feeling valued in the relationship. Just like you're not feeling valued by your boss. So when you fix the relationship, the boss situation gets taken care of. So the longer you keep a partner around, in this particular example, the longer he or she keeps a partner around that's not the right person for them, the more it's going to come out in the boss. And it's like, oh. And then I'm like, yeah. So I'll start on the cusp. I'll start with the planet, in any planets in the house, right? And then I'm just without looking at the chart, listening, because there are times where I don't get the chart until after I hear the discussion. And then I'm like, yeah, that confirms it. There are other times where I'm looking at the chart and then it's guiding my questions. And then there are some times where I'm just listening to the discussion. Unconsciously, I know their chart, and I'm just paying attention to what jumps out at me in the conversation, and then I find that in the chart. There's always a way it connects. So people don't come to me like people don't come to me because they just have nothing else to do on a Friday night and they just want to talk to an astrologer. People come to me because they have something they want to solve, problems that they have. Beginning astrologers tend to focus just in the house that the problem is being described. Other astrologers will look at rulerships after that. Okay, what planets rule the cusp of the house? I spend a lot more time on aspects. Because just like a planet has a lower and higher expression, just like a sign has a lower and higher expression, in my opinion, aspects do too. And it stems from the higher and lower expression of the planet and the sign, but factoring in the relationship. So if we'll take that Saturn-Mars example, maybe the person's really, really good at taking action in their career, right? And then they're not really good in the relationship. Well, now if you put that with a square, that presents a challenge, right? Square challenge. That presents this challenge that has to be overcome. You're like, well, what if it's a trine? Well, it's not going to be, right? Because you're not going to get 100. Unless you have a really conceivably I don't know if there's a way with the house system that I use that you would actually get a trine. Let's see here. 8, 9, 10. No. I don't. Maybe with intercepted signs, but I'd have to look at it. I don't think you're. But if you factor, okay, well, what if the problem is coming from a trine? So let's just put a trine scenario in there. So, right. So if it's a trine, and you're like, well, is this really causing a problem? Then I have to look at the elements in play. So there's another video that I wanted to do around. Because sometimes people just ignore trines because they're easy flowing aspects. There's some criteria I use to determine if it's going to be easy flowing or not. And so if a trine is at play, there's actually more things that we can look at to kind of tweak what's going on there. And so it's not necessarily easy flowing, but have they brought the element? Let's just look at the basics. Have they brought the element to a higher expression? Because in sign aspects, with a trine is going to be the same element, right? And so between a trine, there's two modalities in play for that element. So one way to look at it is have they actually addressed those modalities? So do they know how to initiate the water element and ensure that the water element continues throughout a period of time? Sustains, right? From a cardinal and fixed water. Okay. I don't know. So there's other things that we can look at in those situations, but the key is listening to what the person's saying and what they're expressing and how they're perceiving what's going on around them. Find that in the chart instead. No more guess the sign. I don't care about the sign, sun sign especially. I care about what energy is active in that description. Because this comes up a lot, especially in partners. They'll be like, my partner is like this. And then the other person's like, no, I'm not. I'm like this. And they're like, and it's like, it's because you're perceiving things very differently. And, it's always interesting. How you perceive your partner, though, can be reflected by the sign on the 7th. Can be your own sign on the 7th. Even if your partner is not that. And it's yet you see more of that sign in them. It's more of a kind of a filter over your lens. You're kind of perceiving that person to be more that way. So what's interesting is if somebody said, I'm like X and my partner's like Y, guess our signs. I would actually be curious, okay, is it you giving that label for your partner? Because if so, what I'm actually guessing is probably either ascendant or moon of you and your 7th house sign on how you would perceive your partner. So the key comes down to the intention behind the discussion, right? If somebody's sharing things with you because they're your client and you're helping them navigate stuff, I mean, yeah, I'm paying attention to how they're describing the problem so I can find it in their chart. If it's somebody I'm just having a hard time getting along with, I just take a step back and I go, what am I perceiving is what is active for them right now? And then what do I know about that to bring that to a higher expression? And then that's what I do. And you'd be amazed at how well that it cleans things up really, really fast. Like it's really a powerful thing. So, it's interesting. I don't think that date with that woman was to actually go on a date. I think it was more so that I could have the experience of really refining how to hear these things in language and then go back and actually find that I was right about the placement. And if anything, it helped her navigate that placement to a higher expression and probably got her to find the person that she was looking for. So it's like I wasn't too thrilled with that particular date, but it taught me the story that I was then able to share with you, and it got me to understand how to hear these particular things. And then I've used it time and time again. And then in hindsight, and then the kicker with this is in hindsight, you don't want to beat yourself up for not having recognized this in the past. Because I've even been down that road. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's why this person's out of my life. That's why I got in the way of this relationship or friendship, or that's why this person needed XYZ from me and I wasn't able to. And I just said, forget it, stop. I'm at the point where I recognize it in my interactions with other people. I'm going to do this. And then it actually got me to the relationship that I'm in now. And it got me to make sure that I navigated other friendships or acquaintanceships a little bit more elegantly, as opposed to just having a couple different realities battling it out, because you don't want to do that. So this is extremely powerful stuff. And if you just start listening, don't try to match what you're hearing to their chart. Just listen for what's active and navigate it based on your awareness of that. And that will serve you very, very well, because that's what's basically stuck. That's the energy that's stuck. And then so you just get it moving again and you bring it to a higher expression. And so instead of, if a friend wanted to tell me, oh my gosh, you're blah, 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 and started rambling on about negative things about me, I would just be like, I would have to listen into that and realize how that person is perceiving those things. And then if the intention, I would come down to the intention. If the intention was to help them, then I would pay attention to how they're perceiving that. I wouldn't debate their perception of me. That would kind of defeat the purpose. I might help them see a different perspective, but I need to get to, if they're a client, I need to get to the root of what's actually going on there. Because if they're perceiving me a certain way, whatever energy that is that's active is going to get in the way of other areas of their life. And so as a client, I would need to help them navigate that. Okay, so there's a lot you can do. This is very, very powerful. Just for now, start listening to other people as they talk and as they share, and just pay attention to what energy is active. Because see, you take somebody who's working in their career and you talk to them. You take somebody then who is, it's like outside of their job, maybe hanging out with family, and you talk to them, you might hear two totally different things because different energies are active at different times. You take somebody then who's describing a problem, it may come down to that energy. Say, well, what energy is active? So I look at, for me, how do I describe a current problem, a current situation, a current thing that I need to navigate? And I pay attention, okay, where is that energetically? What am I missing here? And because the problem could come up based on a goal that I have in an area that I have, right? Unrelated to the exact way that it's coming up, but just, unaware of the way that it's related to the way that it's coming up. But more so, just the fact that it's there and it's in the way, right? It's like a detour on the road, right? So it's saying, hey, here, look at this detour and then navigate it, and you'll actually get closer to your destination in a faster period of time. Like, okay. So there's ways to do this with other people, ways to do it with clients, ways to do it with yourself. For now, just pay attention to the energies that are up in conversation. You could actually listen to this episode and this video, and you could actually understand more of what energy is active for me in the course of explaining this particular topic. And there's some other topics, totally different energies are active. And yet there's an overlap between some of the core ones as well. Okay, so if you do have any questions or comments about this, please put them below. If you like this video and like to see more like it, please subscribe. And as always, aloha, ahui ho. I'll talk with you again soon. Take care.